The speedometer needle quivered just past 100 miles per hour, a silent testament to the fury and desperation coursing through Amber Mackenzie's veins. Her hands, white-knuckled on the steering wheel, trembled with a cocktail of rage, grief, and an intoxicating sense of power. The world outside her car window had become a blur, trees and streetlights melding into a dizzying kaleidoscope of motion. In the passenger seat, Dom Russo's eyes widened with dawning horror as he realized the magnitude of Amber's intentions. "Amber, please," he pleaded, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engine and the rush of wind. "Slow down. We can talk about this." But Amber wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on the road ahead, her mind replaying the moment had uttered those devastating words. "I think we should break up." The pain of rejection, the humiliation, the sheer unfairness of it all. It consumed her, leaving no room for reason or restraint. In the back seat, Connor Walsh, Dom's best friend, gripped the edges of his seat, his face a mask of terror. He had insisted on coming along, hoping to mediate, to be the voice of reason. Now, as the car hurtled down the empty Strongsville road at a speed that defied sanity, he realized his grave miscalculation. Time seemed to slow as Amber's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine screamed in protest, the frame of the car vibrating with the effort. In that suspended moment, 3 young lives teetered on the precipice of oblivion, their futures about to be violently rewritten by the impulsive actions of a broken heart. And then, with a sickening lurch, time snapped back into motion. The car veered sharply to the right, tires screeching against asphalt. The world outside the windshield became a whirling chaos of trees and sky. The last thing Amber heard before impact was Dom's desperate cry, a sound that would haunt the dreams of those who survived for years to come. In the blink of an eye, on a quiet stretch of road in Strongsville, Ohio, 3 lives were forever altered. One decision, born of pain and anger, set in motion a tragedy that would send ripples through a community, leaving in its wake shattered families, unanswered questions, and a stark reminder of the destructive power of unchecked emotions. This is their story. Strongsville High School buzzed with the typical energy of a Friday afternoon in early spring. Students rushed through the halls, the air filled with a palpable sense of anticipation for the weekend ahead. Among the sea of faces, Amber Mackenzie stood out, not because she was particularly striking or loud, but because of the quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from her. At 18, Amber was in her final year of high school, counting down the days until graduation. She was of average height, with long brown hair that she often tucked behind her ears when she was concentrating. Her eyes, a deep shade of green, held a spark of intelligence and curiosity that had caught the attention of more than a few of her classmates over the years. As she made her way to her locker, Amber's mind was far from the weekend plans that occupied her peers. Instead, she was focused on the upcoming science fair, where she would be presenting her project on renewable energy sources. It was more than just a school assignment for Amber. It was a passion, a glimpse into the future she envisioned for herself. "Hey, Earth to Amber," a voice cut through her thoughts, accompanied by a gentle nudge to her shoulder. Amber blinked, coming back to the present to find her best friend Lily Chen grinning at her. Lily was Amber's polar opposite in many ways. Outgoing, always laughing, with a knack for bringing Amber out of her shell. Where Amber was focused and sometimes intense, Lily was carefree and spontaneous. It was a friendship that balanced them both. "Sorry, Lil," Amber said, offering a sheepish smile. "Just thinking about the science fair." Lily rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Of course you are. But come on, it's Friday. We've got the whole weekend ahead of us. Please tell me you're not going to spend it all cooped up with your solar panels and wind turbines." Amber laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Not all of it," she conceded. "I promised my mom I'd help with the garden tomorrow morning, but after that, I'm free." "What did you have in mind?" Lily's eyes lit up with excitement. "Well, you know how Dom's band is playing at the Rusty Nail tomorrow night?" She wiggled her eyebrows suggestively. At the mention of Dom's name, Amber felt a flutter in her stomach. Dom Russo had been a constant presence in her life since middle school, always hovering on the periphery of her social circle. He was a year older, having graduated the previous spring, but his band still played local gigs around Strongsville. Amber had harbored a crush on him for years, drawn to his easy charm and passion for music. I don't know, Lil. Amber hesitated, closing her locker. You know crowds aren't really my thing. Come on, Amber, Lily pleaded, linking her arm through her friends as they walked towards the school exit. Live a little. Besides, I happen to know that Dom's been asking about you. This caught Amber's attention. He has? She asked, trying and failing to keep the eagerness out of her voice. Lily grinned triumphantly. Yep. Connor told me that Dom's been wondering if you're seeing anyone. This could be your chance. Connor Walsh was Dom's best friend and bandmate, a fixture in their social circle known for his easygoing nature and killer drum solos. If Connor was talking to Lily about Dom's interest in Amber, it had to mean something. As they stepped out into the warm spring afternoon, Amber felt a spark of excitement ignite within her. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe it was time to step out of her comfort zone, to take a chance on something, or someone new. Okay, she said finally, a small smile playing on her lips. I'm in. Lily squealed with delight, pulling Amber into a quick hug. Yes, trust me, you won't regret this. We're going to have an amazing time. As they walked to the student parking lot making plans for the following night, neither Amber nor Lily could have imagined how this simple decision would set in motion a chain of events that would alter the course of their lives forever. The sun shone brightly overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement. In that moment, full of hope and possibility, the future seemed limitless. Amber Mackenzie stood on the precipice of change, unaware that the choices she would make in the coming months would lead her down a path from which there was no return. The Rusty Nail was a local institution in Strongsville, a converted warehouse that had been serving as a music venue and hangout spot for the town's youth for over 2 decades. On Saturday night, it was alive with energy, the air thick with the smell of stale beer and the buzz of anticipation. Amber stood near the back of the crowd, feeling out of place in the jeans and blouse Lily had insisted she wear. She tugged self-consciously at the hem of her top, wishing she'd opted for something less form-fitting. Lily, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease, chatting animatedly with a group of their classmates. You look great, Lily reassured her for the 100th time that night. Relax, Amber. Dom's gonna be blown away when he sees you. Before Amber could respond, the lights dimmed and a cheer went up from the crowd. She felt her heart rate quicken as Dom's band, Echoes of Eden, took the stage. And there he was, Dom Russo, looking every bit the rock star in ripped jeans and a vintage t-shirt, his dark hair artfully tousled. As the first chords of their opening song rang out, Amber found herself captivated. Dom's voice, a perfect blend of raw emotion and polished skill, filled the venue. His fingers danced across the fretboard of his guitar with an ease that spoke of countless hours of practice. For the next hour, Amber was lost in the music. She found herself swaying to the rhythm, caught up in the energy of the crowd. When Dom's eyes swept across the audience and seemed to linger on her, she felt a jolt of electricity course through her body. As the last notes of their final song faded away, the crowd erupted into applause. Amber clapped until her hands hurt, a wide smile on her face. She turned to Lily, ready to gush about the performance, only to find her friend grinning mischievously. Don't look now, Lily whispered, but I think someone's coming our way. Amber's heart leapt into her throat as she turned to see Dom making his way through the dispersing crowd, heading straight for them. He was slightly out of breath, a sheen of sweat on his forehead from the performance, but his eyes were bright with excitement. Hey, Amber, he said, his voice slightly hoarse from singing. I'm really glad you could make it. Up close, Amber was struck by how blue his eyes were, how they seemed to sparkle in the dim light of the venue. She swallowed hard, willing herself to speak. Hi, Dom. Great show. You guys were amazing. He grinned, running a hand through his hair. Thanks. We've been working on some new material. I was hoping you'd like it. There was a moment of awkward silence, broken only when Lily cleared her throat pointedly. Oh, you remember Lily, right? Amber said quickly, gesturing to her friend. Dom nodded, offering Lily a friendly smile. Of course. Thanks for coming out, both of you. Lily, ever the wingwoman, suddenly remembered she had to make a very important phone call. I'll catch up with you later, Amber, she said with a wink. disappearing into the crowd before Amber could protest. Left alone with Dom, Amber felt a mix of nervousness and exhilaration. They fell into easy conversation, talking about the band, their shared classes from the previous year, and their plans for the future. "So, I hear you're quite the science whiz," Dom said, leaning against the bar. "Connor mentioned you're working on some big project for the science fair?" Amber's eyes lit up at the mention of her project. "Yeah, it's about sustainable energy solutions for small communities. I've been researching different combinations of solar and wind power that could be implemented on a local scale." She launched into an explanation of her project, her earlier nervousness forgotten as she spoke about her passion. Dom listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest. "That's incredible, Amber," he said when she finished. "You know, I've always admired how dedicated you are to your studies. It's inspiring." Amber felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For years, she had watched Dom from afar, admiring his talent and charisma. To have him here, showing interest in her work, felt like a dream come true. As the night wore on, they moved outside, sitting on the hood of Dom's car in the parking lot. The spring air was cool, but Amber barely noticed, too caught up in their conversation. They talked about everything and nothing, their favorite books, their dreams for the future, the places they wanted to travel. "You know," Dom said softly, looking up at the stars, "I've always felt like there was something special about you, Amber. I just never had the courage to tell you before." Amber's breath caught in her throat. She turned to look at him, finding his gaze already on her. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Dom leaned in. Amber's eyes fluttered closed as their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss. It was everything she had imagined and more, sweet, gentle, and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Amber couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. Dom grinned back, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Would you like to go out sometime?" he asked. "On a proper date, I mean." Amber nodded, her heart soaring. "I'd love to." As they exchanged numbers and made plans for the following weekend, Amber felt as though she was floating. The night had been perfect, like something out of a movie. She couldn't wait to tell Lily all about it. What Amber didn't realize as she drove home that night with butterflies in her stomach and Dom's kiss still tingling on her lips was that this was just the beginning. The spark that had ignited between them would grow into a flame, one that would ultimately consume everything in its path. For now, though, Amber Mackenzie was simply a girl, experiencing the thrill of first love, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments and breathless anticipation for Amber. Her relationship with Dom blossomed rapidly, consuming her thoughts and reshaping her priorities. What had started as a spark that night at the Rusty Nail quickly grew into a roaring flame, intense and all-encompassing. Their first official date was a picnic in Strongsville Community Park. Dom had prepared everything himself, sandwiches, fruit, and even homemade cookies that he admitted his mother had helped with. They sat on a checkered blanket under the shade of an old oak tree, talking and laughing as the afternoon slipped away. "I can't believe we waited this long to do this," Dom said, reaching out to intertwine his fingers with Amber's. "It feels like I've known you forever." Amber felt her heart skip a beat at his touch. "I know what you mean," she replied softly. "It's like everything just clicked into place." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Dom leaned in and kissed her. Unlike their first kiss, which had been tentative and sweet, this one was deeper, more passionate. Amber felt as though she was melting, lost in the sensation of Dom's lips on hers, his hand cupping her face gently. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Dom rested his forehead against hers. "Amber Mackenzie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "will you be my girlfriend?" The word yes tumbled from her lips before she could even think about it. At that moment, everything felt perfect. As spring turned to summer, Amber and Dom became inseparable. They spent long, lazy days by the lake, went on impromptu road trips to nearby towns, and attended every one of Dom's band practices. Amber found herself swept up in Dom's world, captivated by his passion for music and his dreams of making it big with echoes of Eden. Her own interests, once so central to her identity, began to take a back seat. The science fair project, that had once consumed her thoughts, now felt distant and unimportant compared to the rush of being with Dom. When she did work on it, it was often with Dom lounging nearby, strumming his guitar or offering encouragement. Lily, ever observant, couldn't help but notice the change in her friend. "I'm happy for you, Amber," she said one afternoon as they lounged by Lily's pool. "But don't forget about your own dreams, okay? You've worked so hard for that scholarship." Amber brushed off her friend's concern with a laugh. "Don't worry, Lil. I've got everything under control. Besides, Dom's really supportive of my work." But even as she said the words, a small part of Amber knew they weren't entirely true. Her grades, once impeccable, had begun to slip. She'd missed a crucial deadline for her science fair project, forcing her to scramble to catch up. But every time she considered pulling back, spending more time on her studies, Dom would look at her with those blue eyes full of adoration, and all her resolve would crumble. As summer wore on, Amber found herself spending more and more time with Dom and his friends, particularly Connor Walsh. Connor, with his easy smile and laid-back attitude, quickly became a fixture in their lives. He was always there, whether they were hanging out at the Rusty Nail after a gig or having a bonfire at the lake. "You two are like something out of a romance novel," Connor teased one night as they sat around the fire, Dom's arm draped casually around Amber's shoulders. "It's almost sickening how perfect you are together." Amber blushed, snuggling closer to Dom. "We're not perfect," she protested weakly. "Pretty damn close," Dom said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, Amber, but I'm grateful every day." Words like these made Amber's heart soar. She had never felt so loved, so wanted. Dom made her feel special in a way no one ever had before. It was intoxicating. But as the summer began to wane and thoughts of the upcoming school year loomed, a subtle shift began to occur in their relationship. Dom, who had been working part-time at his father's construction company, started talking more and more about taking a year off before college to focus on his music. "We're really close to getting a record deal, Amber," he said excitedly one evening as they sat on the hood of his car, watching the sunset. "If we can just get a few more gigs in Cleveland, maybe even open for a bigger act, we could really make it." Amber listened, trying to share in his enthusiasm. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. What about their plans to attend the same college? What about the future they had talked about building together? "That's great, Dom," she said, forcing a smile. "I'm really happy for you guys." If Dom noticed the hint of hesitation in her voice, he didn't show it. He launched into a detailed explanation of the band's plans, his eyes shining with excitement. Amber found herself nodding along, pushing down the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. As August drew to a close, Amber stood at a crossroads. On one side was the future she had always envisioned for herself. College, a degree in environmental science, a career making a difference in the world. On the other was Dom, with his dreams of stardom and the intoxicating whirlwind of their love. Standing there in the fading summer light, Amber made a choice. She chose Dom. She chose the rush of first love over the steady path she had always imagined for herself. It was a decision that would set in motion a series of events that would change everything. What Amber couldn't have known then, as she kissed Dom under the stars and promised to support his dreams, was that sometimes the most passionate flames burn out the fastest and leave the most destruction in their wake. As autumn painted Strongsville in shades of red and gold, the first cracks began to appear in Amber and Dom's seemingly perfect relationship. The transition from carefree summer days to the structured routine of the school year brought with it a host of new challenges and pressures. Amber, now in her final year of high school, found herself struggling to balance her academic commitments with her desire to support Dom's musical ambitions. Her once pristine grades had slipped, and the mountain of college applications looming before her seemed insurmountable. One crisp October afternoon, Amber sat at her desk, staring blankly at the half-finished essay on her laptop screen. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Dom, each one a tempting distraction from the task at hand. "Come on, Amber," he pleaded in his latest text. "We've got a gig tonight in Cleveland. It could be our big break. Amber glanced at the clock, then back at her unfinished essay. The responsible part of her knew she should stay home and should focus on her schoolwork. But the thought of disappointing Dom, of missing out on a potentially pivotal moment in his career, was too much to bear. With a sigh, she closed her laptop and began to get ready. As she applied her makeup, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. For a moment, she hardly recognized the girl staring back at her. Gone was the studious, focused Amber of a few months ago. In her place was someone new, someone whose world revolves entirely around Dom Russo. The gig in Cleveland turned out to be less of a big break and more of a sparsely attended bar show. As Amber watched Dom perform, she couldn't help but notice the hint of frustration in his eyes, the way his smile seemed forced between songs. After the show, as they sat in a 24-hour diner nursing cups of lukewarm coffee, Dom's disappointment was palpable. "I really thought this was going to be it," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I thought we'd have label reps there, you know? Someone who could really help us take the next step." Amber reached across the table, squeezing his hand reassuringly. "It'll happen, Dom. You guys are too talented for it not to." He offered her a weak smile, but she could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. It was a look she was seeing more and more frequently lately. The drive back to Strongsville was quiet, the silence broken only by the soft strains of the radio. As they pulled up in front of Amber's house, Dom turned to her with a serious expression. "You know I appreciate you coming out tonight, right?" he said. "It means a lot to have you there, supporting me." Amber nodded, trying to ignore the gnawing guilt in her stomach as she thought of her unfinished essay. "Of course, I'll always be there for you, Dom." He leaned in, kissing her softly. "I love you, Amber. I don't know what I'd do without you." The words sent a thrill through her, as they always did. But as she watched Dom drive away, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was such a thing as loving someone too much. The following weeks brought more missed assignments, more skipped study sessions in favor of band practices and gigs. Amber's parents, once supportive of her relationship with Dom, began to voice their concerns. "We're worried about you, honey," her mother said one evening over dinner. "Your grades are slipping, and you hardly seem to spend any time at home anymore. Are you sure you're not letting this relationship interfere with your future?" Amber bristled at the implication. "Dom is my future, Mom," she snapped. "He supports me and believes in me. Why can't you do the same?" The hurt look on her mother's face sent a pang of guilt through Amber, but she pushed it aside. They just didn't understand. They couldn't see how special what she and Dom had was. But as the college application deadlines loomed ever closer, even Amber couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. She found herself lying awake at night, torn between her love for Dom and the dreams she'd held for so long. It all came to a head on a chilly November evening. Amber sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by brochures from various universities. She had finally forced herself to sit down and seriously consider her options, and the reality of her situation was starting to sink in. Her phone buzzed, Dom's name lighting up the screen. With a deep breath, she answered. "Hey, babe," Dom's voice came through, excitement evident in his tone. "Great news! We just got offered a 2-week tour opening for the Broken Strings. It's mostly small venues, but it could be huge for us. We leave next week." Amber felt her heart sink. Next week was when her top-choice university was holding interviews for their prestigious environmental science program. It was an opportunity she'd been working towards for years. "Dom, that's great," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But next week, that's when my interview at State is scheduled. You know how important that is to me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Dom spoke again, there was an edge to his voice that Amber had never heard before. "Important to you? Amber, this could be our big break. The thing we've been working towards all this time. I thought you understood how much this means to me, to us." "I do understand," Amber protested, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "But Dom, this is my future we're talking about. I can't just throw away everything I've worked for." "Everything you've worked for?" Dom's voice was cold now. "What about everything we've worked for? I thought we were in this together, Amber. I thought you believed in me, in us." The conversation devolved from there, words thrown like weapons, old resentments bubbling to the surface. By the time Amber hung up, her cheeks were wet with tears and her heart felt like it was being torn in two. As she sat there in the growing darkness, surrounded by the remnants of her old dreams, Amber Mackenzie realized that she was standing at a crossroads. The choice she made now would define not just her future, but who she was as a person. Little did she know, this moment of crisis was just the beginning. The true test of her love for Dom, and the limits of what she was willing to sacrifice for it, was yet to come. The weeks following Amber and Dom's argument were tense, filled with stilted conversations and unspoken resentments. Amber attended her interview at State University, her mind clouded with thoughts of Dom on tour without her. She stumbled through her responses, her usual confidence noticeably absent. As she left the interview, she knew in her heart that she had blown it. The dream she had held for so long, to study environmental science at a top university, seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Dom returned from the tour 2 weeks later, his eyes bright with excitement and new experiences. He regaled Amber with stories of life on the road, of the connections the band had made, of the possibilities that now seemed within reach. "We've got another tour lined up for spring," he told her, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "Bigger venues this time. Amber, I really think this could be it for us." Amber forced a smile, trying to share in his excitement. But inside, she felt hollow. The tour would coincide with their high school graduation, another milestone she would have to experience without him. As winter settled over Strongsville, bringing with it gray skies and bitter winds, Amber felt increasingly isolated. Her friends, concerned about her changing behavior and slipping grades, had begun to distance themselves. Even Lily, once her closest confidant, now watched her with worried eyes and spoke in careful, measured tones. One particularly cold December evening, Amber found herself at the Rusty Nail, watching Dom's band perform. As she stood in the crowd, she realized with a start that she barely recognized the girl she had become. The Amber of a year ago would never have neglected her studies, would never have let a relationship consume her entire world. As Dom launched into a new song, one he had written about their love, Amber felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to escape. She pushed her way through the crowd, ignoring the concerned looks from Connor as she rushed past him at the bar. Outside, the cold air hit her like a slap to the face. Amber gulped in deep breaths, trying to calm the panic rising in her chest. She fumbled for her phone, dialing the one person she knew would understand. "Lily," she said when her friend answered, her voice cracking. "I think I've made a huge mistake." An hour later, Amber sat on Lily's bed, pouring out everything she had been holding back for months. Lily listened without judgment, offering tissues and comforting words. "Oh, Amber," Lily said softly when she had finished. "I've been so worried about you. We all have. You're not yourself anymore." Amber nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I know. I love him so much, Lily. The thought of losing him terrifies me." Lily took Amber's hands in hers, her expression serious. "But Amber, what about losing yourself? You've worked so hard for so long. Are you really willing to give up all your dreams for Dom?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Amber didn't have an answer. The next day, Amber steeled herself for a difficult conversation with Dom. She found him at the local music store where he worked part-time restocking shelves of guitar strings. "Dom," she said, her heart pounding, "we need to talk." They went for a walk in the park, their breaths forming small clouds in the cold air. Amber tried to explain her feelings, her fears about losing herself in their relationship. Dom listened, his expression growing increasingly closed off. "So what are you saying?" he asked when she had finished. "That you don't believe in us anymore? That you're giving up on everything we've built?" "No," Amber protested. "I'm just saying that maybe we need to find a balance. I can't keep putting my life on hold, Dom. I need to focus on my future too." Dom's eyes flashed with anger. "I thought I was your future, Amber. I thought what we had was special." "It is special," Amber insisted, reaching for his hand. He pulled away, leaving her grasping at empty air. "But Dom, we're so young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. Maybe we need to take a step back, focus on our individual goals for a while." The words hung between them, sharp and final. Dom stared at her for a long moment, his expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. "I can't believe this," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "After everything we've been through, you're just going to throw it all away? For what? Some stupid college degree?" Amber flinched at his words, feeling as though she'd been slapped. "Dom, please, try to understand." But Dom was already walking away, his shoulders rigid with anger. "I understand perfectly, Amber. You're choosing your precious future over me, over us. I hope it's worth it." Amber watched him go, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to run after him, to take back everything she had said. But a small, stubborn part of her knew that this conversation had been long overdue. As she walked home alone, the weight of what had just happened settled over her like a heavy blanket. She and Dom weren't officially broken up. Neither of them had actually said the words, but something fundamental had shifted between them. What Amber didn't realize, as she climbed into bed that night with a heavy heart, was that this conversation had set in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. The worst was yet to come, and the choices made in the heat of emotion would have consequences far beyond anything she could have imagined. The weeks following Amber and Dom's confrontation in the park were a blur of tension and unspoken words. They didn't officially break up, but their relationship had entered a state of limbo, neither fully together nor completely apart. Dom threw himself into his music with renewed fervor, spending long hours rehearsing with the band and booking as many gigs as possible. Amber, meanwhile, tried to refocus on her studies, desperately attempting to salvage her grades and her chances at college admission. But the damage had been done. As January turned to February, Amber received a series of rejection letters from her top-choice universities. Each one felt like a physical blow, a stark reminder of how far she had strayed from her goals. On a particularly gloomy afternoon, Amber sat at her desk, staring blankly at the latest rejection letter. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dom, "Gig tonight at the Rusty Nail. Be there?" Amber hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. Part of her wanted to say no, to stay home and wallow in her disappointment. But the thought of spending another night alone with her failures was unbearable. "I'll be there," she typed back. That night, the Rusty Nail was packed, the air thick with the smell of beer and the buzz of excited conversation. Amber stood near the back, nursing a soda and trying to ignore the pitying looks from her former classmates. Everyone knew about her string of rejections. News traveled fast in a small town like Strongsville. As Dom took the stage, his eyes scanned the crowd, finally landing on Amber. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his gaze, regret, perhaps, or longing. But then it was gone, replaced by the confident smirk he always wore when performing. The band launched into their set, the music pulsing through the venue. Amber found herself swept up in it despite herself, her body swaying to the rhythm. For a little while, she could forget about her problems, lose herself in the music and the energy of the crowd. But as the night wore on, Amber couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. She watched as Dom chatted and laughed with a group of girls after the show, his arm casually draped around one of them. The sight sent a jolt of jealousy through her, followed quickly by a wave of self-loathing. She had no right to be jealous. Wasn't she the one who had pushed him away? Unable to bear it any longer, Amber slipped out of the venue and into the cold night air. She leaned against the brick wall, taking deep breaths and trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside her. "Amber?" A familiar voice called out. She turned to see Connor approaching, concern etched on his face. "You okay?" Amber tried to force a smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just needed some air." Connor didn't look convinced. He leaned against the wall next to her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of his cologne. "You know," he said after a moment, "Dom's been a mess since your fight. He won't admit it, but I can tell." Amber felt a mix of emotions at Connor's words. Part of her wanted to run back inside to find Dom and make things right. But another part, the part that had been slowly rebuilding her sense of self over the past few weeks, held her back. "It's complicated," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Connor nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It always is." They stood in silence for a moment, the muffled sounds of the band's next set drifting through the walls. Then, Without warning, Connor leaned in and kissed her. Amber froze, caught off guard by the sudden action. For a split second, she found herself responding, caught up in the warmth and comfort of human connection. But then reality came crashing back, and she pulled away abruptly. "Connor, I can't," she said, her voice shaky. "This isn't right." Connor stepped back, regret and embarrassment clear on his face. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." But his words were cut off by the sound of the door slamming open. Dom stood there, his face a mask of fury and betrayal. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. Amber felt her heart drop. "Dom, it's not what you think." But Dom wasn't listening. He stormed off into the parking lot, Amber and Connor following close behind. "Dom, please, let me explain," Amber pleaded, reaching for his arm. He whirled around, his eyes blazing with anger and hurt. "Explain what, Amber? How have you been stringing me along while hooking up with my best friend?" "It's not like that," Amber cried, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." But her words only seemed to fuel Dom's rage. He turned on Connor, shoving him hard. "Some friend you are," he spat. Connor stumbled back, hands raised in surrender. "Dom, man, calm down. It was my fault, okay? Amber didn't do anything wrong." The situation was spiraling out of control. Amber watched in horror as Dom and Connor faced off, years of friendship disintegrating in a matter of moments. "Both of you, stop it," she shouted, stepping between them. "This is insane." But her intervention only seemed to make things worse. In the heat of the moment, Dom made a grab for her, his movements fueled by anger and alcohol. Amber, startled, stumbled backward, losing her footing on the icy pavement. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her head connecting with the hard ground with a sickening thud. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Dom's face, transforming from anger to shock to fear. When Amber woke up in the hospital 2 days later, the world had changed irrevocably. She learned, in bits and pieces, what had happened after her fall. Dom, consumed by guilt and fear, had fled the scene in his car, with Connor giving chase to try and stop him. In his emotional state, Dom had lost control of the vehicle, resulting in a horrific crash that had claimed both his and Connor's lives. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Strongsville. 2 young lives cut short, another forever altered. As Amber struggled to come to terms with what had happened, she was haunted by the knowledge that her actions, her choices, had set this terrible chain of events in motion. In the months that followed, as she slowly recovered from her physical injuries, Amber grappled with the weight of guilt and grief. The future she had once dreamed of seemed impossibly distant now, overshadowed by the enormity of what had been lost. But as spring returned to Strongsville, bringing with it new life and the promise of renewal, Amber made a decision. She couldn't change the past, couldn't bring back Dom or Connor. But she could honor their memory by living her life to the fullest, by pursuing the dreams she had once been so close to abandoning. With the support of her family, friends, and a grief counselor, Amber began to rebuild. She applied to community college, determined to get her education back on track. She volunteered at local environmental organizations, channeling her pain into positive action. And on quiet evenings, when the weight of memory threatened to overwhelm her, Amber would visit the small memorial that had been erected at the crash site. There, surrounded by flowers and mementos left by friends and family, she would reflect on the fragility of life, the consequences of unchecked emotions, and the importance of staying true to oneself. The events of that fateful night in Strongsville would always be a part of her, a stark reminder of how quickly life can change. But as Amber stood at the threshold of her future, she carried with her not just the pain of loss, but also the determination to make every moment count. In the end, the tragedy that had nearly destroyed her became the catalyst for growth, understanding, and a renewed appreciation for the preciousness of life. And though the road ahead would not be easy, Amber Mackenzie stepped forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage, compassion, and the hard-won wisdom of one who had glimpsed the darkest depths of human emotion and emerged, battered but unbroken, on the other side.